Parminder. How are you?
How you doing? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm okay. Just a bit busy. We're building, putting the roof on a shed at the moment.
Okay, that sounds exciting. In the garden?
Yeah.
Oh,
So
yeah. Well, thank you for taking some time out to take part in this.
no problem.
Yeah, we've had a conversation before where we've talked about stories that influence us, and
Yep.
I think we're probably both in agreement that stories can have a huge impact on the way we behave. So let me
Yes.
start. Let me start with the story of a story that I think you and I probably have some shared experience, in the sense that when people say to you, when people say to us, "Where are you from?" and the
Hmm.
story that we have around
Hmm.
that question, "Where are you from?" Because for some people, that "Where are you from?" question is a story about our race rather than
Hmm.
our location. And in one of the conversations that we've had before, we've talked about Maharaja Dalip Singh.
Yep.
Yeah. And the story about him being a prince, when he was raised as a
Hmm.
Christian, he was called a prince. And
Hmm.
I saw a film called The Black Prince, because apparently that's what they used to call him, the Black Prince. And when
Hmm.
his mother, the Maharani, came to visit him in England, in London, she reminded him that you're not a prince, you're a king, which shifted the
Yeah.
identity. Like, that's not who you are. Who you
Hmm.
are is a Maharaja, and a Maharaja is a king. And so that's an example of a story that shifted his identity, because I
Hmm.
suppose that was the beginning of him questioning what he'd been, I suppose, in a way, colonized to believe.
Hmm.
So let's talk about our stories. Like, what is your story, like, in response to that question? Where are you from?
Wow.
What's your identity?
Wow. Where am I from and identity? Growing up, where are you from and your identity became the same question. But as I got older, I realized it was two separate things. But um, early days, where are you from? The response, depending. If I was in Birmingham, I went to a predominantly mixed school, all different races. So the question never came about. The question came about when I started going to, say, university. Where are you from? Firstly, I'm from Birmingham. So I was really proud that I was from Birmingham, his location. Then it transpired that the question was more based around um, me looking different. So, predominantly English people, white people. So that when they were asking where am I from, it wasn't, oh, are you from Birmingham? But my lineage. And then I'd start saying, well, I'm Punjabi, I'm Sikh, and I've never had a turban. So it's like, oh, how are you a Sikh? Where's your turban? I was surprised that they knew that Sikh wore turban, but that's another story. But it highlighted to me that question of where are you from and that identity um, was important for me to own and not have it defined by others. So similar to like Maharaja Dalip Singh or the Black Prince, he had his identity defined by others until he was given his history and heritage, then he could reclaim it. And I think growing up, we were taught that everyone in white, everyone in white was good, everyone else was bad or wrong. So that identity affected us because we didn't look like the host nation. But it came back to that same story. So me talking to my mom, my grandmother, finding out from my dad our history and heritage, hearing their stories about growing up where they grew up, them telling us about us being taken to India when we were younger, going back to the Bind, helped me create the foundation to respond back to where am I from. I could tell them, this is me. But then at the same time, I challenge them. I go, what difference does it make? So that's where I've gone. I'm nowadays I just say, they go, where are you from? I just say I'm from Birmingham, and that's it. And then when they try and press, I said, why? What do you want to know?
Yeah, because really,
Put the
like that.
question back. Not to have a conflict or an argument, but the question is, why do you want to know, or what particular bit do you want to know about my history or heritage or identity? Because otherwise we end up telling everything and it doesn't make any difference.
Yeah, that's right. Because I mean, I've been on holiday, I've been traveling in Europe at times, and when I've been asked that question, it is a race question. They don't
Yeah.
really want to know. At the time when I was living in London, they didn't really want to know that I was from London. They wanted to know what race I was. And so when I said I'm from London, that didn't really respond to their question. And they said, but yes, where are you really from? And I'd say I was born in the Punjab, and it's like, well, I don't know what the weather's like in the Punjab, so if you're asking me a question about, like, what are people kind of, what are they protesting about at this point in time, I wouldn't know, because I don't live there. And so it didn't really make sense. And this question of identity, though, I think it strengthens our identity when we do have a clear knowledge of our ancestry. So, for example, I was brought up in Stafford to what would be called a working class family, because both of my parents were manual laborers, and my father worked in a factory, and my mother worked in different places where she could just do menial work. And so I defined myself as working class. But when we look back at our history, my forefathers established a whole village, named after, it's named Mahil Gella, because they established it. And so that shifted my identity. It's like, well, am I really working class? Because I come from this long lineage of, people who have created whole villages around themselves. And so that our stories, the stories of our lineage, can empower us. And when we break that, we break the lineage because we just haven't educated ourselves on it. That can also disempower us, can't it?
Yeah. So coming back to the two things. So going on holiday in Europe, the question has always been, where are you from? When I said, oh, we're from England, because that's the first point, they go, no, you're not English. And then follow through, tell us more about yourself. A prime example, we was in Paris, and me and my wife, and we went to a shop, and the couple in front of us was white English, and they spoke in English to the shopkeeper. The shopkeeper refused to answer in English and said, look, only French. Came to our turn, and I said, look, I only know English or Punjabi. If you know either or, please let me know. And the woman goes, no, we can speak English with you. I said, but what was wrong with the English? With the English people? He was like, no, but they're English. You're not English. So going to holiday in Europe helped remind me I had an identity separate from my location, from where I came from, which I think, as you said, that just coming through this whole owning of identity and categorizing ourselves as where we live. So that this thing about working class, it was interesting that we too did call ourselves working class because that's how we were recognized, and we all voted Labour and things. But my mum's dad was a postmaster in Africa, so that's middle management. And my dad's dad ran his own factory in Ludhiana, a massive factory that employed a minimum of 70, 80 people and other such things. So yes, we came here and we got labeled working class because that's what we thought we were. But truth of the matter, as you said, there was landowners, there were business owners, members of the family came over and bought property in London and now are very wealthy. But yeah, you're right. I think we were defined by where we ended up going.
Yes, our socio-economic situation in the present isn't always like the full story. So we have to look at that bigger picture, don't we? What's the bigger story of who we are?
But I think it's interesting also how we fight, maybe a stronger term, but how we try to retain this working class image because it seemed to be the right thing to do instead of embracing who we are. You know, in many cases, there's teachers, there's doctors, there's business entrepreneurs. There's so many people who would not necessarily fit into this working class mold. I think it's more the fact that, from my understanding, from my dad came to the country, my granddad and everyone else, and we sort of settled in communities which were heavily populated by immigrant communities who all voted Labour at the time. And Labour was the old Labour, not the new Labour, but the old Labour, which was working class, trade unions. So we fitted into that mold, when actually many of us at the time were educated or not necessarily working class back in the 50s and 60s. You know, for you to come over into this country in the 50s and 60s required skill, level of education, an ability to speak English, other such things. So I think, you know, we were more than working class, but we just adopted that because of wherever we settled.
That's right. And so so we start with that question of like, where are we from? And we need to interpret that for ourselves. And then what are you doing here and where are you going? And I know, like, you know, we probably both know a lot of even members of our own family or friends who gone from England to Canada or to the US.
Yeah.
This was not, you know, England wasn't, it wasn't a place in which they could thrive and flourish. And so they had to move even further. And so it's like, what are we doing here? How come? I know my sister traveled to, she lives in Canada now. Why didn't I go to Canada? You know, what is it that keeps us here? What, you know, why are we staying here? Where are we going? You know, because the answer to why are we here will determine where we're going as well, won't it?
Yeah, no. For us, for me, it was more the fact that while we here, my great granddad was part of the British Indian Army, so he had an automatic, how can I say, citizenship. I think it was British overseas citizenship. So because he was a part of the British Indian Army, my mom's granddad and my mom's dad, my nanaji, they were both from Kenya, you know, Nairobi. So they had British citizenship via that being a British colony. So we all, as a family, we already had a connection to Britain. My granddad's brothers, from my dad's side, my dadaji, and from my mom's side, nanaji, his cousin, had all visited England at some point after the Second World War. Obviously, our great granddad had been here previously because, you know, of the British Indian Army, and from my mom's side, so my mom's granddad was, you know, fought the Mau Maus alongside the British. So, you know, there was a link already. That's why we came here. But thereafter, some members of our family missed England and went straight to Canada, went straight to America. And the reasons why they did that was the weather was better there, the housing was better there, the land mass was better there. You know, because, you know, I went on holiday, on a tangent, I went on holiday to Tenerife. And you'll understand why I'm saying this. And whilst on holiday in Tenerife, most of the businesses there, especially the off licenses and the giftware shops, were owned by South Indians, people who came from Bombay. And in the conversation between us and them, they said, "You guys from up north of Punjabis, you're crazy." I said, "Why is that?" He goes, "You guys went to England, cold, damp. You know, yes, you can earn more than we earned here, but that lifestyle." And it goes, "We did not come to England. We went straight to Tenerife or Spain. The weather's as good as back in India. And okay, we might not earn as much, but we have a better lifestyle." And that's like making me think, you know, maybe coming back to England, or as most family members would refer to England as being somewhere that they had a connection to was a mistake. You know, we're the, as you can say, we're the products of a Commonwealth, and we gravitate to England.
Yeah, we're products of colonialism because our history, in our story is intertwined with the British story for hundreds of years. It's not from the 60s or the 50s, 1950s. It's like much longer than that, because you talk about your relatives, your grandparent being part of the army. My uncle was part of the British Army as well, and that's why we ended up here. He was part of it in the Second World War, but I know that in the First World War, I think it was about 1.4 million Indian soldiers that took part in the First World War. And not only did like a significant proportion of them end up like not ever going back home after that World War I, which had nothing to do with the Indians, basically, but they, not only that, I think it was about 12 million Indians that died following the war from that virus that, they called it the Spanish flu. It was a virus like the coronavirus that killed about 12 million Indians. That's in, we were never taught that. No. That happened in 1918, 1919. Whole villages were wiped out because these soldiers had brought that virus back from Europe. So you see, our stories are intertwined, and we go back hundreds of years. We can't separate the British story from our story, really.
It's true, because I think our story would have been different depending on who the last colonizer was. I think if the last colonizer was, I don't know, the Americans, or the last colonizers were the French, I think we would have had a story connected to those two countries. But it's interesting with what you're saying, how our stories are intertwined. Because I was once taught that, is it Brighton? In Brighton, you have those dome buildings.
The Brighton, yes.
Yeah, and they were created there to help Indian soldiers in the First World War to convalesce.
Yes.
And but then they were asked to, then they weren't utilized because the English soldiers started fraternizing with local English women, and they didn't like that, so they stopped sending them there. Yeah, but I think the sooner we understand our true identity, separate from those who have conquered us or ruled us, and come back to our core, the better for all of us. Because otherwise we have a and I use this term as I mean it, a whitewashed version of us, which is not healthy, because we just eradicate our past, and going forward we have less to tell.
Well, when the story that I had been brought up to believe about who we were as Punjabis, I thought that there was like an Aryan invasion in the north, and that the Aryans kind of pushed the Dravidians, who were the original Indians, further south. That was the story that I kind of grew up believing, that there were these two kind of races, the Aryan race, which was predominantly settled in the north, and the Dravidian, which was predominantly in the south. But now they're questioning that. I've just seen something recently to say that that was a colonial story, which fitted the narrative. The British, when they came into power, it was like, I suppose it was a way of making them not the other. So that they were, that we already had this history, in that it was a way of getting buy-in, I suppose, from those who considered themselves to be of the same Aryan race as the British. You would get more of an alliance and allegiance, and it's like them against like the Dravidians, basically, who were tended to be the low caste. So that's another story which is being reshaped now, because now they're saying, no, that's just a colonial story. We were never invaded by the Aryans, and I don't know. I'm just kind of like, those are just, maybe it's hearsay, but I know that story is being questioned.
I think there's lots of stories, depending on how far you want to go back. I ever since I learned about, is it MacLeod who I think his name was MacLeod, who took all the religious texts from India and then, understood them, unpicked the bits and pieces that benefited the British, and then resold Islam, Hinduism, Sikhism back to the masses who were uneducated and controlled them. There's an example of how people have utilized something that is core to all of us in India, and manipulated it to say, for example, to the Sikhs, you're a martial race. No, we're not. Guru Nanak Dev Ji was not a warrior. Yes, Guru Gobind Singh and various other gurus prior to Guru Gobind Singh had to take up arms and present themselves. And I always refer back to the term Sant Sapai. It's not Sapai Sant. Mm-hmm. If it was Sapai Sant, then we could say, yeah, we're a martial race. But to say saintly soldier, the saint comes before the soldier. Mm-hmm. But then the British came and said, you're warriors. So they appealed to our ego, similar way that they took advantage of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. It was his ego that let him down. Yes. But then coming back to, you're saying the Aryan and the Dravidians, I like the story that we are the offspring of all those who entered India by foot and met whoever they met, lost to, won to, I don't know. You had Alexander the Great, who came through via Punjab, via that way. You had probably the Mongols, but maybe Genghis Khan, who knows? You probably had Vikings, because Vikings used to travel towards the east via land, So prior to the British, you probably had so many land invaders coming through, Afghanistan, through China, through over the Himalayas, and meeting the Punjabis. Yeah. And before they could go any further, imagine rape, pillage, whatever that happened, the battles that we will probably never know. And we seem to be the offspring. We have Roman noses like mine. You have people who are fairer than any English person. My nonni, who's passed away, she looked more Mongolian. Mm-hmm. She had fair white skin, small eyes, but grey. So my another member of my family, like my mummy, my uncles, they look Greek more than they look Indian. Mm-hmm. So you think, so who influenced who? I did this this test that you do with the DNA, then you send it in the post, just to find out. I've got bits of Greek, I've got bits of Irish, bits of Scandinavian in me, predominantly Indian, but it depends on how far this goes. But it showed that there was mixed, slight hints of other bits into me. So I think I worked out I was 85% Indian, or that part of the world, and the remaining 15% came from elements of Europe.
Yeah, because we're all interconnected. It's like, the history that we are aware of, like say, 4,000 or 5,000 years, like that's nothing compared with probably billions of years that we've been around, perhaps. But the thing is, see, that reminds me of another thing. It's like when the British changed our education system and brought in this compulsory education, they changed our narrative to fit in with the biblical stories. So the Bible, based on the Bible, like we've only been around like for, let's say, 5 or 6 centuries. I don't know, it's like, but Moses and Noah's Ark and all of that. And so they changed the narrative of like the knowledge that we had to fit in with what they thought was the truth. The truth was, represented in the Bible. And so if like the Hindu scripts were talking about something that happened, say 200,000 years ago, it's like, well, that can't be right. Let's change that, that. So the narrative was molded. It's like, well, that's not true. That's not accurate. And everything that was considered to be true and accurate was based on what they believed in. You know, their moral compass was guided by the Bible.
I think that's very interesting how you brought that in, because there's two things here. One, I remember having a debate a while back where we were discussing the fact that there's this anglicized or a British way of looking at religion. So if you wanted to be classed as a world religion and be recognized in the world as being very important, this is, and it was a British concept. People forget this. And again, appealing to people's ego, you have to have, a symbol, you have to have a book, you have to have a place of worship. And actually, if you look at our history, we don't actually have a holy book like they have the Bible. We have the Guru Granth Sahib, which is a personification of a guru, which is a lot more than a book. To just make it, call it a book. We don't actually have a symbol. Yes, we have a khanda, which means and represents certain things, but it's not necessarily a symbol. We have they say a place of worship. We made gurdwaras into a place of worship. But actually, when Sikhi first formed or came about, we didn't actually have gurdwaras. We had, yes, we were told to pray, we were told place of worship, but it wasn't. The gurdwaras also became places where people came for solace, people came for advice, engagement, and learning. There's a whole load of elements, but what we, instead of sticking true to our path, we've conformed to become something else just to meet the criteria of becoming a world religion. Otherwise, you're considered a deviant. Otherwise, you're seen as something different. So again, we've changed ourselves to meet with a criteria which is ours. So that's one. And I think the other thing is when we look at what is connected back to ourselves and how our religion, our history is retaught to us, but when you're at school here or by whoever you meet, it's as if ours was a time long before the British time. What people don't understand that at the time of King Henry VIII, the Great Fire of London, the plague, all the things that had happened in the Sikh history were happening at the same time. It seems because it's been detached and torn away in this fabric of time that, Sikhism happened at some long forgotten time of mythology and so on and so forth. And this was in the time of modernity. And what people forget that we've bought into that mythology as well, the Sikhs have. We like to depict the paintings of the gurus in all these ornate and everything. But actually, if you think about it, what was happening at that time in our history was very similar to, there was an overlap of what was happening here. And maybe those clothing, the ornateness, and all those other things weren't true.
Yeah, and you talk about things happening at the same time. Well, Guru Nanak was a contemporary of Martin Luther. So at the same time that Martin Luther was protesting, and like that brought about the Protestant religion, Guru Nanak was protesting against Hinduism and brought about the Sikh religion. And they were contemporaries. They never met. They were contemporaries. So our Sikhism is, it's in parallel with Protestantism, isn't it?
Yeah. So, and we forget to make the connections. We forget to make the chronological connections, which could then help us understand it in real terms. If you were ever to go into I think it still happens, but if you were to go into a gurdwara and say, talk to me about the history of Sikhism, talk to me about, how we are connected to this time frame, and you can't have those conversations. Because most of the people who are in the gurdwaras don't know the connections, or can only tell you about a Bani, or can only tell you about a Kavat, or can only tell you about something that's already their limited knowledge. So we're then only pushing the same thing. And I think we need to change our own narrative to save our identity, not necessarily save our identity, sorry, take that back. To reclaim identity, we need to change the narrative and ensure that we can say, as you said, Guru Nanak Dev Ji was Martin Luther's contemporary. It was the time of this. So there's a connection. We can then say that actually, the time of the Great Fire of London, this was happening within the Sikh history.
Yeah.
Whatever technologies existed here in England at that time, they also existed in the Punjab at the same time.
Well, apparently, before the British colonized India, India was doing really well for itself. Yeah, it was responsible for about 40% of the overall worldwide GDP at that time. Yeah. It was a very rich country, and we don't make these connections, do we? Of like, well, when Britain was still kind of fighting the plague, as it were, India was quite prosperous at that time.
India was trading. There was trading between the East and the West for such a long time. Venice, if I remember reading something correctly, Venice was the portal between the West and the East. Things came from there. There was the Silk Road was connected to the same time as, but it's all there. Mm-hmm. But as they say, history is written by those who win. The victors write history. So, and as we've been having recent discussions, the last empire is the British Empire, and the remnants of that still exist, and we're still unpicking that. And I think, we just need to go back and realize that we're not some mythological, we're not just stories. We're real. Those activities actually happened. It's a shame. It's a shame that there's not many more people having these type of debates and trying to push it within education, within history, and reclaiming some element of the narrative.
And I suppose that's the purpose of us having this conversation, is that we're having these conversations and, hopefully inspiring others to have more and more conversations like this, because it's through the conversations that stories remain alive, right?
Yes. The power of stories is very important. My day job, I work within the charity sector. I help raise funds and various other things for community charities as well as national charities. But it's always the case studies, the narratives of the service users, and the stories and people's journeys that capture the minds and the hearts and the imagination of funders and those who are investing and supporting these charities. So stories are important in all realms of our lives.
Absolutely. And I've heard somebody say, I don't know who it was, but they said, like, when people ask us, where are you from? It would be a much better question to say, where are you going?
Most definitely. Or the question should be, where have you been? Mm-hmm. And where are you going? Like that, instead of where are you from?
Because
I think,
where are you going? It's like, then are we going along the same path? It's like we share similar values. If we're going to the same destination, we know that we may be able to support each other on our journeys if we're going to the same place.
Most definitely. Because I think connection should be based on intention, ambition, and direction, rather than a history that may have been shared, but things change. So I like that. I like that. Where are you going? Yes, most definitely.
Yes. Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you very much for your time, Parminder. And
no problem.
I will speak to you again very soon.
Okay, take care now. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.